On the 12th of November, 1944, at 8:50 a.m. in the Tromsø Fjord, northern Norway, Captain Sir Robert Weber stood on the bridge of the mighty battleship Tirpitz, his eyes scanning the horizon. The cold, crisp morning air of the Arctic enveloped him, and the surrounding mountains rose like dark walls of rock against the pale sky. The giant warship, weighing 52,600 tons, was the heaviest battleship ever built by a European navy. Weber was ready, preparing for an impending naval battle. With his boots firmly planted on the bridge, he felt the weight of the ship beneath him, secure in the knowledge that no force could breach the ship's defenses. The armor was unyielding. No torpedo could break through the anti-torpedo nets. No bomb from above could penetrate the deck. With chemical smoke generators at the ready on the cliffs, it was a fortress. Yet, Captain Weber had made one grave mistake. He failed to understand that the rules of warfare had already shifted. The threat was not from the horizon, not from ships or planes. It was something entirely new, a challenge that no armor or depth of water could shield against. To Winston Churchill, the Tirpitz was a beast, and for 3 long years, Churchill had written one memo after another to Admiral T, directing that the destruction of this ship was the greatest objective at sea. There was no target more important. Why such an obsession with a ship that rarely left port? Because the Tirpitz was winning the war without even firing a shot. This ship, by simply existing, was a force unto itself. Naval strategists referred to it as a fleet in being. Just its presence in the Norwegian fjords forced the British to station 2 modern battleships, HMS King George V and HMS Anson, along with an entire fleet carrier, all tied up at Scapa Flow, guarding against an attack that might never come. The Allies were paralyzed by this one ship. Convoys to Russia had to be heavily escorted, diverting precious resources, and merchant ships continued to be sunk in the freezing waters of the Arctic. For all of this, the Tirpitz sat in her fjord, consuming Allied resources with her mere existence, a strategic black hole. Captain Weber was aware of his ship's power, and he felt invincible. The fjord, surrounded by towering mountains, was a natural fortress, impossible for any conventional attack to breach. The anti-torpedo nets around the ship were sturdy, woven with steel and anchored to the seabed. The smoke generators were manned around the clock, ensuring that the ship remained hidden at a moment's notice. As he stood there, feeling the weight of the ship's formidable defenses, he thought it would be invulnerable to any attack. But he couldn't have been more wrong. By the fall of 1943, the British had recognized that the Tirpitz's location made a conventional attack impossible. Bombers couldn't drop their bombs low enough before hitting the surrounding rocks, and torpedoes couldn't get past the steel nets. That's when the British came up with an audacious plan. They would attack beneath the Tirpitz, from below the surface of the fjord. The plan called for the creation of X-craft submarines, small, virtually useless vessels, barely 50 feet long and 5 feet in diameter. They were designed not to dive deep, but to sneak under the ship and plant explosives beneath her keel. The mission was beyond insane. The chances of survival for the men inside these cramped, claustrophobic submarines were slim. The X-craft had to be towed across the stormy North Sea, navigate through minefields, cut through the ship's steel nets, and plant explosives deep beneath the Tirpitz. The odds of success were less than 10%, and the chances of the men surviving even lower. Only 3 submarines made it to the target. Lieutenant Donald Cameron, commanding X-6, found himself submerged in the fjord, blindly navigating with a broken periscope, a damaged compass, and unreliable depth gauges. He was so close to the Tirpitz that he could see German sailors on deck, throwing scraps into the water. As the X-craft reached the ship, Cameron knew his chances of survival were non-existent. Yet, he dove his vessel onto the seabed directly under the Tirpitz, set the timer for the charges, and waited. As he and his crew sat as prisoners on the ship's deck, unaware of their fate, they heard the faint ticking of the countdown. At 8:12 a.m., the first explosion rocked the Tirpitz. The blast lifted the ship 5 feet into the air, throwing men off their feet, plunging the ship into darkness and causing significant damage. However, despite the catastrophic damage, the Tirpitz remained afloat. Her hull, designed for survivability, held firm. The crew managed to control the flooding, and within 6 months, the ship was operational again. This proved one thing to Captain Weber. German engineering was unmatched. If the ship could survive a direct hit from 2 tons of explosives, then no weapon could take her down. As the months passed, the Allies realized they would need to do more than simply attack with conventional explosives. The Tirpitz was too resilient. By April of 1944, the British launched Operation Tungsten, a coordinated aerial assault designed to bring the Tirpitz to its knees. The operation included 2 fleet carriers, HMS Victorious and HMS Furious, along with 4 escort carriers, cruisers, and destroyers. 42 Barracuda dive bombers, escorted by 80 fighters, dove toward the Tirpitz in an attempt to overwhelm her defenses. The bombs struck the ship in quick succession, but the Tirpitz shrugged them off. While the ship took significant damage, including fires and destruction of upper decks, the ship's core, its vital machinery, remained untouched. The ship was still afloat, seemingly impervious to any attack. But the British didn't give up. They called upon a new weapon, one designed by a mad engineer. Barnes Wallis, the mastermind behind the bouncing bomb used by the dam busters. Wallis's theory was simple but revolutionary. If the Tirpitz couldn't be breached from above, then the foundation beneath the ship had to be destroyed. This idea led to the creation of the Tallboy, a massive bomb weighing 12,000 pounds. Designed to be dropped from a great height, the bomb would burrow into the seabed beneath the Tirpitz before detonating, creating a shock wave strong enough to break the ship's support and sink it. On the 15th of September, 1944, Operation Paravane was launched, with Lancaster bombers carrying the Tallboy on a perilous mission. The RAF pilots faced a nightmare of navigation through outdated maps, magnetic interference, and freezing rain. 6 aircraft crash-landed in the Soviet Union, but despite all obstacles, 32 bombers set off toward the Tirpitz. The first bomb struck the sandbank beneath the Tirpitz and detonated, sending a shockwave through the ship. The ground beneath the ship liquefied, leaving the Tirpitz without the support that had made her seem unsinkable. 2 more Tallboys struck the port side, punching through the ship's thick armor and detonating inside, devastating the ship's core. The ship began to roll, its compartments flooding as it capsized completely at 8:52 a.m., just 11 minutes after the first bomb struck. The Tirpitz had finally been sunk, her hull rolled over, and her massive superstructure buried deep in the mud of the fjord. The aftermath was grim. Nearly 1,000 German sailors perished, and those who survived faced a slow, agonizing death trapped inside the ship's upturned hull. Captain Weber went down with his ship, a man who had believed his ship was invulnerable, unassailable. But the new war, one that combined industrial precision, applied physics, and aerospace engineering, had proved that no fortress, no matter how strong, could survive forever. The sinking of the Tirpitz marked the end of an era in naval warfare. a final proof that the rules of combat had irrevocably changed. The Tirpitz's legacy was a harsh one. It was a symbol of German engineering, a ship built to be indestructible, a ship that had swallowed Allied resources for years. Yet, despite the ship's massive power, despite the countless efforts to destroy it, the final blow came not from traditional naval tactics, but from a new kind of warfare, one that saw the Earth itself used as a weapon. The Tirpitz's fall was a testament to the changing nature of war, where the conventional rules no longer applied. As the Tirpitz sank beneath the cold waters of the fjord, it symbolized the end of an era of naval dominance, proving that even the most powerful warships could be brought down by innovation, strategy, and sheer willpower. The beast was dead, and with its destruction, the face of modern warfare had been forever altered. As the Tirpitz lay at the bottom of the fjord, the significance of its sinking reverberated across the Allied forces and the German high command alike. To the Germans, the loss was catastrophic. The Tirpitz had been their most powerful asset in the north, a constant threat to Allied convoys and a symbol of their naval superiority. The Allies had poured immense resources into trying to neutralize it, and the task had cost them dearly. The sinking was not just a military defeat, but a blow to morale that would ripple through the Nazi leadership. In London, Winston Churchill's reaction was one of solemn victory. For years, he had been obsessed with the destruction of the Tirpitz, believing that the ship was more than just a physical threat. It was a psychological weapon that had paralyzed the Royal Navy and consumed precious resources. To him, its sinking was the final vindication of the strategic and technological innovations that had been brought to bear against it. The Tirpitz's destruction was a symbol that innovation, not tradition, was the key to victory in the modern world. Yet, even in the wake of this triumph, there were moments of quiet reflection among the Allied commanders. The sinking of the Tirpitz marked the end of a chapter in naval warfare, one where brute force and battleship supremacy reigned. But the Allies understood that they were fighting a new kind of war. It was no longer about having the biggest guns or the thickest armor. It was about agility, precision, and leveraging every technological advantage they could muster. And the Tirpitz had taught them that the old rules of war were increasingly irrelevant. The attack on the Tirpitz also revealed the depths of the Allied commitment to defeating the German Navy. The sheer scale of Operation Catechism, the final strike against the Tirpitz, had been nothing short of a monumental effort. It required the sacrifice of countless resources, including the lives of the brave men who flew those Lancaster bombers, knowing that the odds of survival were slim. But their dedication and courage were rewarded when the Tallboys found their mark, breaking the ship's hull apart and sending it to the bottom of the fjord. The Allied airmen who participated in the raid would go down in history as part of a new breed of warriors, those who fought with precision, against all odds, and with the will to shape the future of warfare. As the wreckage of the Tirpitz sank beneath the cold waters, it left behind a trail of questions. Had the Germans miscalculated their own invulnerability? Had Kapitän Weber truly believed the ship was unsinkable? Or had he simply refused to acknowledge the changing tides of warfare? And what did this defeat mean for the future of naval warfare? The Tirpitz was not the only fortress to fall in the conflict. Across Europe and the Pacific, similar stories were unfolding. The principles of warfare were rapidly evolving, shaped by technological advancements and the ingenuity of those willing to challenge the old guard. The sinking of the Tirpitz was a clear sign that the era of traditional naval warfare was drawing to a close, giving way to a new paradigm where the balance of power would shift to those who embraced new tactics and weapons. As the waters closed over the Tirpitz and her wreckage disappeared into the depths of the fjord, the Allies could not afford to rest on their laurels. The war was far from over. But for the first time in years, the Allies could take a deep breath, knowing that the one force that had haunted them for so long had finally been put to rest. For Captain Weber, it was the end of everything he had believed in. The ship that had been his sanctuary, his fortress, his pride, was no more, and with it, the old war died. The Germans would fight on, but the loss of the Tirpitz had symbolized the end of an era. No matter how hard they tried to build the next invincible ship, the lesson had been learned. The war was no longer about who had the biggest, strongest ship. It was about who could adapt to the changing tides of warfare. In the end, the Tirpitz became more than just a ship. It was a symbol of a bygone age of war, a time when brute force and towering steel structures could command the sea. But as the Tirpitz sank, so too did the era it represented. And with it, a new kind of war was born, one driven by innovation, science, and the courage to break free from tradition. The destruction of the Tirpitz was more than just a military victory. It was a turning point in the history of warfare, a reminder that the most powerful forces in battle are not always the ones you can see with your eyes, but the ones that shift the very rules of engagement. The Tirpitz was dead, but the war was far from over, and the future of warfare had just been redefined. As the Tirpitz's wreckage lay in the waters, forever a symbol of the past, the Allies moved forward with renewed determination. They knew that the future of combat lay not in the unsinkable ships of the past, but in the new weapons and strategies that were reshaping the world. The Tirpitz had been the beast of the fjords, but it was now a relic, a reminder that no matter how strong something might seem, it could always be brought down by innovation, perseverance, and the courage to challenge the status quo. The fall of the Tirpitz proved one thing: no fortress, no matter how formidable, could withstand the relentless march of progress. And with that, the future of warfare was sealed. The Tirpitz was gone, but its legacy would live on as a lesson in the ever-changing nature of combat. As the Tirpitz slowly sank beneath the frigid waters of the fjord, the world stood still for a brief moment. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant sounds of waves lapping against the rocky shore. The once feared warship, which had been the bane of Allied convoys and a constant reminder of German strength, now lay at the bottom of the fjord, a twisted hulk of its former self. For the Germans, the loss of the Tirpitz was an undeniable blow to their naval supremacy. It was more than just the destruction of a ship. It was the shattering of an illusion. The Tirpitz had symbolized German power on the seas, a weapon of overwhelming strength that seemed untouchable. Its fall was a stark reminder that even the most formidable machines of war could be undone by the ingenuity and determination of those willing to challenge the status quo. But for the Allies, the sinking of the Tirpitz was a victory that transcended the battlefield. It wasn't just about sinking a ship. It was about proving that no fortress, no matter how well guarded, could survive the relentless march of progress. The Tirpitz had been built to defy the laws of warfare, to be the unsinkable fortress of the sea. But in the end, it was the innovative spirit of the Allies, their willingness to embrace new ideas and technologies that led to its downfall. The old ways of war had failed. The new way had triumphed. In the aftermath of the Tirpitz's sinking, the Allies began to rethink their approach to warfare. The lessons learned from their relentless pursuit of the Tirpitz, the need for precision, innovation, and adaptability, became the foundation for future military strategies. No longer would wars be fought solely with massive tanks, battleships, and artillery. The future of warfare would belong to those who could think beyond tradition, those who could see the battlefield not as a place of brute strength, but as a space where intelligence, technology, and creativity would rule. Captain Weber, the ship's captain, went down with his ship. His belief in the Tirpitz's invincibility had been shattered, just as the ship had been. The mighty battleship, which had once been the pride of the German Navy, now lay in ruins, a tragic testament to the changing tides of war. Weber's final moments, surrounded by the wreckage of the ship he had devoted his life to, served as a grim reminder of the cost of hubris. The world watched as the Tirpitz sank, marking the end of an era in naval warfare. But while the ship was gone, the lessons of its rise and fall would remain. The age of the battleship was over, and a new chapter in military history had begun. The Tirpitz was not just a ship. It was a symbol of the past, a relic of a time when size and strength alone determined victory. In the end, the Tirpitz was brought down not by another battleship or an aircraft, but by the very foundation of the Earth itself. The shock wave that rocked the ship beneath the water was a reminder that no matter how strong a fortress might appear, the world around it was constantly shifting, constantly evolving. And in the world of war, those who refused to evolve would be left behind. As the fjord fell silent, the Tirpitz's legacy faded into the cold waters, but its story would live on. It would serve as a powerful lesson for future generations that in the ever-changing world of warfare, no fortress is invincible, and no machine of war, no matter how powerful, can stand the test of time if it refuses to adapt. The sinking of the Tirpitz marked the final chapter of one warship's story and the beginning of a new era, one driven by innovation, precision, and the relentless pursuit of victory. In the end, the battle for the Tirpitz wasn't just a fight for control of the seas, it was a fight for the future of warfare itself. And in that fight, the Allies had emerged victorious, proving that the true strength of a nation lay not in the might of its ships or weapons, but in its ability to adapt, innovate, and outthink its enemies. The sinking of the Tirpitz was not just the end of a ship, it was the end of an era, and with it, a new age of warfare had begun. An age where victory would no longer be determined by the largest guns or the thickest armor, but by the ability to outmaneuver, outthink, and outpace the enemy. The Tirpitz was gone, but the lessons of its destruction would echo through history, shaping the future of warfare for generations to come.